All right, and it is go time. So good morning, everybody. Um, Welcome to today's webinar with the Community Data Program on using Excel 3D maps to visualize and share your community data. My name is Mary Clark, and I'm part of the Community Data Program team, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. My colleague Mike Dider is here as well, and he'll be answering questions through the chat box as well as at the end as needed. Our presenter today is Alex Mayer. Alex has a Master's of Public Administration from Queen's University, and he's a certified project management professional. Most of his experience is in health. His current role is health analyst for the Centretown Community Health Centre. That's in Ottawa, for those of you who don't know. And he leads center-wide planning activities, coordinates evaluation and quality improvement initiatives, and he builds capacity for the collection, analysis, and use of community data to ensure that the center is ever responsive to the community's needs. And so, as you can see, his job title describes basically what we're all doing, which is basically building capacity using community data. His professional experience also includes working in public health and teaching Canadian health policy at Queen's University. So welcome, Alex, and thank you very much for taking the time to present to us today.
Thanks a lot, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't often do webinars, but it's always nice to get a chance.
Before we get going, I'll let you know, Alex has a very detailed presentation for us today. It will probably take up our whole hour and a half today. Anytime you'd like to ask questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. I'm going to keep track of them, and I will draw Alex's attention to them as needed during the presentation. And we will try to have some question and answer at the end. If we run out of time, I'm sure Alex would be happy to follow up individually with anybody after the presentation. Also, please keep in mind in the chat box, I'm going to be throwing up a few links for you as we go that you can follow along and get those links to the data as well as we go. And then in the teleconference box right above the chat, there's two links. One is to the presentation slides that you're going to see. And then the other one is to a Dropbox folder full of the mapping resources that Alex is using. And so if you want to get those anytime during the presentation, or if you want to just note that down so that you can have it afterwards and you can go look through them, please do so. So without further ado, Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to hand over my screen as well.
Great. Thanks a lot. All right. I'm going to share my screen. You're seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah, it's coming through clearly.
Great.
There we go.
So, welcome. And I'm flattered that you're all here. And it's especially nice to see some folks from public health. That really was, that's where I spent 3 years in North Bay Parry Sound District, and that's how I really got into geospatial data, because I was working on active safe routes to school. So how to get kids more active on the route to and from school, whether that's walking, biking, or other means. And so as I was doing a lot of project management in that realm, it really became apparent that I needed to learn how to use geospatial data. And so I did that within ArcGIS mostly, but as I've now gone into community health centers, realizing that there's not as many resources or as much money to spend on that kind of software. Nice to be able to get your hands on a tool that's going to fit that need at a fraction of the expense, and actually at no expense, considering that everyone has Excel already on their laptops. So it's a nice feature that's now available in Excel 2016 that I'm hoping will be very useful for you all today. So this is me, just so you can put a face to me. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn after the presentation, especially if you have any follow-up questions. Just to orient you to the way that I'm going to present today, the first part is really going to be a basic overview of the new 3D mapping function within Excel. And this is going to be good for, I would say, our moderate users. So really making use of standard geography, and then Excel itself uses Bing search to map features to anything that you could, say, put into Google Maps. Any address that you could find, a province, city, you can really use with just that, you can do a lot within Excel mapping. And then there's going to be the second component of the presentation, which hopefully we'll get enough time to do, which will be all about using custom regions. And that's really where I think our heavy data users will be most interested, because it's all about how do you get the shapefiles into Excel so that you can look at data for various types of StatsCan geographies. And then how can you manipulate that data to get variables and values of interest. So that's the two components that I'm hoping we'll cover today. Just to orient you a little bit to the way that I'll be presenting, so I'll be jumping in and out of the slide and actually doing some demonstration within Excel. So if you want to follow along, I would suggest that you go to the folder that I sent, the link that's been sent around in the chat box area, just above the chat box. One of those links is to a folder where you see all of these resources here. And really, I've packaged this presentation so that if we don't get through all of it today, you still have the PowerPoint. And there's videos embedded within that PowerPoint that take you through all the steps that you need to get to the finished product, which in this case is a basic map using CCHS data. And then for part 2, there's actually a diabetes risk map that I've created that's using dissemination areas, which is a very small geography. And then you'll see that there's all of these saved Excel documents here, and that's really, if you want to jump, if you want to try to follow along, you could really, you can get the Excel for slide 38, and you could kind of just jump to that spot. A couple if you've gotten lost anywhere along the way, or if a step is taking too much time, and so that's all there for you to access through that folder. And then there's a few URLs too. So one of them is to the census data, so that you can actually download it quickly just using this URL. And this is a URL to the geography shapefiles that Statistics Canada offers. So those two URLs are there for you to access as well. So getting back to the map, so we'll just jump into it. So the first step here is we're going to just obtain some sample data. So here we're just going to go to the CCHS download page. Oh, actually, sorry, before I get too carried away here, just a few things to keep in mind as we're working with Excel mapping. It does require a more recent version of Excel 2016 or later. 365 works much the same way, but earlier versions have some limitations, so just keep that in mind. You need to structure your data in a way where each row is a record that makes reference to, obviously, a location variable. That can be a census tract ID number, or if you're less familiar with that GIS stuff, it could just be a city name, it could be a province name, it could be a postal code, it could be just an address. And the fuller your address is, the easier Bing search will locate it, so that you can actually map your data variables to that feature, that address. And finally, and this is, again, for those power users, if your geography is anything other than a standard geography, then you're going to need a boundary shapefile to upload into Excel to define your custom regions, because Excel knows what an address is, it knows what a city is, it knows what a province is, but it doesn't know, a neighborhood that you might make reference to in your locality. So for Ottawa, it wouldn't know what the glebe necessarily is, or what that shape is on a map. So you need to upload a shapefile that tells it that information. And here's a bit of a nitty-gritty piece. So if you're going to do this yourself and get shapefiles and upload them, then it needs to be in a specific format, otherwise it won't accept them. So a really nice value-added service that the Data Consortium can play is really to set up these kind of Excel map templates ahead of time, and that's actually what we've done in Ottawa. So thanks to Stefka at Ottawa, at the Ottawa Community Data Program for setting all those up for all of the nonprofits to use for our mapping needs. All right, so now we'll jump into it. So again, we're going to go step by step. The first step is obviously to go to a data portal and to download some data. So if you've never used CanSim, basically you just go to this link, and then from there you can specify what geographies you want featured in your data. So this is kind of the table as a default, but you can change this table based on the variables of interest. So here we're only going to select age groups 50 to 64 and 65 years and older. We're going to select all the provinces as geographies, and then we're going to pick and choose the indicators that we're interested in. And in this case, we'll just go with fair or poor perceived health, fair or poor perceived mental health, and perhaps we'll go, I think we're going to pick the fruit, sense of belonging, life satisfaction, and having a regular healthcare provider. In terms of characteristics, we're going to want to see this as a percentage rather than a count. And then we're just going to extend the reference period so that we have all of the data that's available for these annual estimates. So that's 3 years of data. And then in terms of laying out the data, we're going to want to have the indicator of interest as a column variable, and then the rest as a row. So your geography is going to be your record, and then you're going to stratify that by all the different, so the age group category, sex, etc., and then the years. Once that's all formatted, you're going to download that as a CSV file. Make it easier to clean. We're going to take out all the accompanying symbols, so we're just going to download it as displayed. And at that point, it's going to take us, so we're basically here. This is what the data looks like when we download it as a CSV. I'm going to save it to our desktop here. And then we're going to open it up. So it's going to give us something like this here. And then what we're basically going to have to do is this is going to be we're going to have to format this as a table. So we're going to want no missing values in our table. So that means that you're going to have to do a bit of data cleaning up front here. And the data cleaning means that you're going to have to drag the names like that. And then you're also going to have to make sure that we're pasting in the categories so that there's no empty cells here. We can take out these two columns here, not very useful. And we can also delete all of this up here. And so once we've plugged in all the holes, then we're going to be ready for the next step of data cleanup. So I've done that just to save us some time. I'm just going to jump to that file, and it's actually in our folder here. So once we're done the data cleanup, our file is going to look something like this here. Yeah, delete this. And from here, there's a few things. So first of all, we want to make sure that there's no non-numeric variables here for these columns here. And then for the reference period here, this currently is formatted as a general variable. But we're going to want that formatted as a date variable for Excel to figure out that we're giving it a year. And we're going to want it to stratify the data by a year. So to do that, we're just going to insert a cell. And again, these are all steps that are identified in the PowerPoint presentation that's linked. So we're going to make this equal to date, specify the year, the month, and the day. And so now we can just drag that down. And now, last step is we'll copy and then we'll paste in place so that we're hard coding those date values. Now we can get rid of this. All right, once that's done, we can select all. We're going to format it as a table. And this is really what we need to do to feed it to the mapping application. And when you're downloading the data from the CCHS download data page, you're going to be doing it as a CSV. You're going to want to save that as an Excel document. So you need it to be a table and need it to be saved as an Excel document. And then it will let you open this up in a 3D mapping application. So you go to Home, Insert. Here's the nice little icon that you're all going to get very familiar with soon. So you're going to open that up in 3D Maps. So this is the screen that you're going to be looking at. And it's kind of an app within an app. So you can see that it's opening a new window and it's kind of, your data's still there in the background. So it shows up. You have the globe here. I can drag and drop. I can zoom in. You can see that the data has already been mapped to the provinces because identified that geography contains a province name. It's just identified that on its own, so it's quite smart. And then obviously it's showing you just the points right now, but we don't have any data added into the model. So here it's showing you the field list. You can toggle that on and off. This is where you can see what variables you have to choose from. But before we get into that, I just want to show you a few things around buttons up here. So you can show your map labels, toggle that on and off. You can display it as a flat map or not. If you prefer the globe, you can definitely keep it as a globe. And I think that's good for now. So now we'll just add in our data so that we can start to look how to display it. And let's look at primary care attachment. So we're going to look at the number of people who have a primary care, a family doctor. So you see that it's now showing you these columns of data, and that's, you can change the data visualization up here at the top. If you have a clustered column that you want to show, you can choose this button here. If you want to show your values as blobs or circles, you can do that. This button. For today, we're going to be mostly using these region, almost like a shapefile essentially. It's recognized the boundaries of the provinces, and now it's applying, it's letting you map your data to those provinces. Here there's a few things. So right now it's showing a little wonky. So obviously the values are between 1 and 100%, but it's giving you these values here because it's summing up. If we go back to our file, it's summing up all of the data for the records that are identified as any given province. So it's summing up all of these for primary care attachment. So we're going to have to instruct Excel to start to stratify our data a little bit. So just to make the indicator a bit more intuitive, we're going to use just the average to display for now. Now you can see that it's displaying the average of all those years of data and those two categories, those two age categories. We can tell it that there is an age category involved here. So now it's recognized that there's two groups there. And then we can go to our filter section, and we can specify and just look at one age category at a time. So right now we're looking at all of them. We're going to just look at 50 to 64 years of age. And at this point, it might make sense to rename your layer. Say this is really just primary care attachment for 50 to 64 4 years. Great. Now it's giving you the range. When you mouse over the features, it's going to tell you the category that you're looking at, as well as the correct percentage for that age group, and but you still haven't specified the years. So it's giving you 3 years, the average for 3 years of data for that age group. So here, using this time field, we're going to specify, and it now finds the time column. And so now, a few things happen. So you now see this scroll bar here, where you can actually play through, and it'll give you 2015, and then the values will change for 2016, and then the values will change once more for 2017, and that's where it ends. That looks a bit crazy because obviously we don't really care about minutes and days like that, so we're going to edit that, change the date format, and we're just going to want to look at the year. That's good enough for us. All right, let's close this out just to give ourselves a bit of a better view. And so now you can really start to see what this shapes up to be. So 2015, 16, and 17. Again, while it's playing, it's not that useful. You can see that shades are changing, but we can't really see the values, or they're not prominently displayed. So to see them while that video is playing, what we could do is just add a label to our feature. So we'll just add a label. We're going to have the label specify the province initials, as well as the field of interest. And now it displays this. So as we're playing from 2015 to 2016, you're going to see that rate change depending on the year that you're displaying. And you can do that for multiple provinces if you're interested in comparing the two rates over time. So yeah, lots of possibilities there. You can zoom in. If you have features that are much smaller than cities, so you have, smaller than provinces such as cities, then you can really zoom in. You could change the angle or orientation of the view to something a little bit different, especially useful if you're using columns to display data. Be able to see the height difference between different columns of data. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of a first glance at just the power of Excel now that there is this nice mapping feature embedded within it. So how are we for time? So 25 minutes in, and that's really kind of the first part of the presentation is just looking at a very simple map and all that you can do using standard geographies. So at this point, maybe we'll open it up. Do people have any questions up to this point?
So you can go ahead and just type in that chat box, and we'll just take a few minutes to take any questions in that first part of the presentation. For those of you who are having problems with the Dropbox links, we'll have to just get that sorted out afterwards, and we'll see if we can get the information to you just via email or another way. So there's a question from Alexandra about what Excel version do we need for this feature? What are you working in?
Yeah.
In?
This is Excel 2016, and you'll have a very similar experience if you're using Microsoft Excel from the 365 package. 213 and earlier is not going to have the same capabilities. So Excel 2013, there's an option to download an add-in. It's called Power Map, and that allows you to work with standard geographies, but it won't allow you to upload custom regions, which is what we're going to do in the second half of today's presentation. Any other questions?
Martin's asking is the presenter is on and off. No, it should be very fluid, Martin. Can you just type more a little bit about your problem and we'll see if we can get it figured out.
Okay, so I'll just move ahead since it is predicted that we'll be a bit short for time.
Oh, there's one more question about the date and time box. Can you explain the date and time box?
The date and time box.
I think that's the one that's floating over issues. It's in the upper left corner, the one that's floating on top of the map.
Oh, okay. So this box here?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, it's really just since our data is stratified by the annual estimates that we're taking on different years, basically what it's doing is it's cycling through those rates. So it's showing you the percentage, and really we're looking at regular healthcare providers. So it's cycling through for the province of Nova Scotia. We'll be looking at 94, 91, 91. So then if we look at our feature here, and we'll just take this one off for now, remove annotation. So Nova Scotia, down here somewhere. Now, as we're cycling through the years, so as we press play, it's going to go from 2015, display the 2015 rate, 2016, 2017. And basically the way that this add-on was designed is that you could create little snapshots or videos where you take people on these they're called tours. So if we put the tour editor screen up here, that's now saved as a 10-second tour. So you could, if you had just an end user that you wanted to present this data to, all that they would have to do is really just play the video that you've created for them that cycles through those 3 years of data, and you can make some notes about what it is that they're looking at. So that's really kind of the idea behind it. But obviously it lends itself to a lot of other applications. And for myself, it's really just a straight GIS, software stand-in. So as opposed to having to buy ArcGIS for something really expensive and learning how to do, some really sophisticated GIS work, this allows me to just quickly, at a glance, map data that's already in Excel anyways. So it's a useful tool that way.
So Alex, there was a follow-up question about whether that works as a filter on the current map. Is that it's just working as a label? Is that right?
And it's also a filter, yeah. So it's only showing you 1 year of data at any given time. So if you want to see the average for the 3 years, then you would take off that.
Oh, I see.
You would unfilter the time, or the year, and then now it's just giving you the average for the 3 years.
Okay.
Because of the way that our data is currently structured, yeah.
Okay, and then there's another couple of questions about exporting out of 3D, like taking the maps out and taking the videos out and exporting them to use in other things. Are you going to talk about that later?
Yeah, so what I'll just quickly bring your attention to is these two buttons up here. So create a video and then capture screen. So depending on how you want to share the map that you've created, you could share it as a tour, you could share it as just a snapshot that you paste into a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation. So you just click this button and now it's copied to your clipboard, and now you can paste it in basically whatever you're using. And I haven't played too much with the create video, but yeah, that's there if you want to use that.
Okay, I'm going to just take one more quick question before we get going. On the next part is a question about the color gradient. Can you just sort of show how do you change that color gradient that's on the screen?
Great. So that'll be in your layer options down here. So if you open up layer options, you can see that you can change the color scale. So that essentially, you can see as I move it up, there's less contrast, so it's expanding the range of your scale, or the scale of your range essentially. So as I diminish the scale of my range, then there's more contrast between values that are pretty close. So the 91 is visibly lighter than the 94, and then the 89 or 88 is visibly lighter than the 91. So that's what this button does up here. Opacity is if you want to obviously see through the data to more of the, if you're looking at a street and your areas are very small, you want to be able to see the street names, then you might decrease opacity so that you can actually see the map labels through the data, right? And then to change the color, so obviously your color scheme is over here, so you could really change to whatever. Some of the colors don't display as well. Obviously, if you're looking at a lighter color, that's not going to display as well as a dark color when you're talking about these kinds of maps here.
All right, that's great. Let's move on to the next part, and then we can do some more questions later on. Thanks, Alex.
Great. So for most of you, that'll be enough, but for some of you, you'll want to really be going through and using these custom geographies here. So you can use all of this using just the simple mapping techniques that we just went through, but for this stuff here, that's when you're going to need shapefiles and you're going to need a bit of extra manipulation to get the data to show correctly. So the good news is that you can now do this. So yeah, don't mind that. So now we're basically, I think it's important when we're doing this kind of a project that we really have a purpose in mind. This helps it make it a bit less dry to kind of tinker through. And it has important implications for the way that we structure our data all along the way. So in my instance, working at a community health center with a regional diabetes program attached to it, the idea was really to use demographic census data to start to look at some of the fields that are commonly used in diabetes risk assessment. And rather than applying a risk assessment tool to an individual, how about using those census fields and that data to tell us something about potentially the inherent risk to an entire area. So if you know the age breakdown within a small geography like this, then you know the ethnicity breakdown, and you know the educational attainment of the folks who live there, and you know what percentage is female versus male. Then you can really start to assess the risk of diabetes using some of the indicators that we typically see in a CAN risk assessment tool. So that was kind of my case study, I guess, for starting to use this application. So here I have a bit of background about that project. I'm just going to skip through it for right now. Essentially, again, just to bring some clarity for those of you who are not as familiar with diabetes risk assessment, there's this kind of standardized tool, and as part of it, you can see that age, ethnicity, sex, and educational attainment are some of the things that inform an individual's risk. And so when they would come to our screening events, we would sit folks down, do this assessment, identify if they're high risk or low risk, and the high risk folks would move on to a point of care A1C testing for their blood to see if they actually do appear to have some uncontrolled diabetes. So this is what we use to identify risk, and so if we can do a semblance of that using what's available through the census data, obviously it's not going to be perfect, but it'll give us a bit of the lay of the land as to where we might want to focus our screening effort. And that was the whole idea behind creating a CAN risk score map. So these are the 4 variables that are available through the census. When we go to download census data, so this is from the Census 2016 download data page. And And if possible, Mary, it'd be nice to provide a link in the chat box to folks so that they can navigate to this page. But basically, it's kind of daunting because there's lots of different geographies, lots of different file formats, and this is, if you're not a prolific data user, this is where you kind of get a little bit overwhelmed. So we're going to just sort through a little bit of that today, just do a bit of education on that first. So here are the different levels of Statistics Canada geographies. So you can see it's kind of a tree, and then there's kind of relationships between the various levels. And the number, so this is for all of Canada. So it's telling you that for all of Canada, there's going to be about 1,650 blocks of geography that are forward sortation areas. There's going to be about 5,400 blocks that are aggregate dissemination areas, okay, and so on. And so you can see that this is going to be a lot more granular dissemination area, it's going to be a lot more granular than a forward sortation area over here. So I'm just going to take you through what some of these terms mean. So census subdivision, we're looking at municipalities or areas treated as municipal equivalent. So if you were to map Ottawa and the surroundings, this is what a CSV map would look like. Forward sortation areas is the first three characters of the postal code. So if you were to map Ottawa, this is what it would look like in Ottawa. Census tract, so we're getting a little bit more granular. Small, relatively stable geographic areas that usually have a population of less than 10,000 people. So these are all different census tract areas. Then we have aggregate dissemination areas and dissemination areas. So aggregate dissemination areas, you're attaching the smallest levels of geography to a census tract to give you a population that is between 5,000 to 15,000 people. Right, that's what it looks like for Ottawa. And this is really the most granular level to look at your census data, which is the dissemination area. Some of these blocks, would average between 400 and 700 people per unit. So you can see some of those pieces are quite small. So in our case, we were really interested in getting, because we are a community health center, and this is our geography here is Ottawa, we really want to be looking at a very granular level. Where are the pockets of high risk? And so that we can situate our screening events as close to those pockets of risk as possible. So to do that, we're going to want to look at probably a dissemination area. That means that we're going to be downloading basically the most massive file that you can get out of that Census 2016 download page. And because it is such a massive file, it's helpful to do a bit of data cleanup before it gets into Excel. For those of you who are frequent census data users, you'll be familiar that there's a tool that we use to do this called Beyond 2020. So Beyond 2020 is a free browser application available from Statistics Canada, and it basically deals with this IVT file format. Allows you to manipulate your data so that you can really clean it up before exporting it into an Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, you can either get the census data from the census website directly, or you can go through the Community Data Program portal, get it through there if you'd like. Basically, once you open the IVT table, it's going to look something like this. So you can see that your geography is specified as all of Canada. So it's got, and then you've got your indicators as rows on the side, and then your sex here. And IVT allows you to basically drag and drop these variables, hide some, show others, and basically what's left showing is what you're going to download as your final product into an Excel spreadsheet. So just to give you a sense of how we would kind of go through this this application, I would select the geography unit. I would drag it down into the rows, and then I would do a search for Ottawa. We're just going to back it up here a little bit. And actually, I've skipped a step here. So, yeah. So how about I just open up the IVT table, and that way it'll just be a little easier to follow. So again, from the Dropbox, the link I provided you, can navigate to. This one's already been cleaned, but that's quite all right. So we have Beyond 20 installed on this computer. So basically, this is what we're looking at. So you can drag and drop geography. You can do a search. You can use an English description. You can type in your city's name. Right now, it's already been cleaned, so all the pieces of geography that are left showing, these are all dissemination areas that are found within Ottawa. Okay, so you can see here, when you look, total sex, the population for all the age groups is 495. So that is corresponding to the total population within this dissemination area. We structured our data appropriately, so we've put all of the geography as rows, for each one is a record, and then the variables of interest are showing up as columns. And so here you could really start to look at, okay, what variables are we actually interested in bringing into Excel? There's obviously lots and lots of columns here, so you probably wouldn't want to bring everything in. You would pick and choose based on what you're interested in. For the ones that you're not interested in, you would select and you would click Hide until you're left with the data that you're actually interested in. Once you've structured your data appropriately, and just the last data cleanup piece actually for geography here, so that we don't have to delete all of this mess after the dissemination ID after the fact, we're just going to go ahead and click labels so that we're just left with the dissemination area ID number. And that's really going to be the primary key that links all of our data to the actual shapefile. So this dissemination area ID is also going to be in the shapefile. They're going to link together to say, oh, this data belongs to that shapefile. All right? So we're just going to X out of this for now. So for our project, we were just interested in those 4 variables that I showed you earlier, which was the age groups, the ethnicity, sex, and educational attainment. So those are, when I cleaned up my data, those are the 4 indicators that were left. Everything else was hidden, and then I exported my data into an Excel sheet. So so we're now at slide 33. So if we go into the Dropbox folder, we'll go to slide 34. Just to save ourselves a few steps here. All right, it's just taking a second to load. Oh. Oops, okay. I've lost my Dropbox. All right, not a big deal. We're just going to power through. So, yeah, actually, I'm just going to go. Yeah, here we go. So what we would be downloading is essentially would end up looking kind of like this here. And again, we would want to do some data cleanup to make sure that there's no empty cells, that none of the cells have like an error or a missing value. So once we convert this into a table, Once we convert this into a table, then it would be a matter of looking at the headers to make sure that there are no missing data variables within each of these columns. All right, so this is what we're looking at. I'm computing my CanRisk data value using this long function, which we're not going to worry too much about. But just to tell you that I'm using various pieces of this to compute a weighted score that tells me what the risk is going to be for each of these dissemination areas. All right. And at this stage, just so that I don't have to drag and drop all of my dissemination areas here to clear out these empty cells, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table and just filter out the empty cells. I'm computing my CanRisk score here. And I'm going to copy that. Okay, what I've done is I'm copying it over to a new tab. And I'm pasting those as values, so now they're hard-coded for the dissemination area of interest. So now I've got all of my dissemination areas. They all have a computed CanRisk score, and I'm formatting it as a table. My table has headers, and here's where I'm going to filter out. So I've got some junk data here that is really sex-specific. I'm just going to use the filter function here to take out all of my blanks. Now I have the dissemination area ID and just a CanRisk score, which is what I want. So now I have a filtered list. What you're going to want to do now is to, so there's a bit of data cleanup for the dissemination area ID number because there's all this junk afterwards. If you hadn't cleaned it up within Beyond 2020, then this is you could create a new column and just use the left function to grab the 8 numbers for your dissemination area ID and put that as a new field. So anyways, as we get to our filtered list here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to copy it and then paste it. We're going to select all, Control A. We're going to select only the filtered cells because those are the ones that we want to copy and paste in place. So we're going to use Alt and then semicolon to select only the filtered cells, and those are the ones that we copy and paste as values, so paste in place, so that now we are only left with this and no kind of cells in between, no rows in between. All right, and at this point too, you can look through your data. You can see, are there any, you can look through the CanRisk variable to see, are there any values that are computing as errors and filter those out. Or you can recode them as 0 or 999, whatever you want to use for your missing value. And basically, once it's formatted as a table, then you've done all the manipulation that you need to do for your data here. And now it's really just about importing your custom region within Excel. So I'm going to jump in to an Excel file here. So let's look at, we're currently at slide 38, so I'm going to pull up 38. Okay, so here's what we're left with. There's no rows in between the cells, so we've erased out all of the cells that we wanted to filter out. Now we would click, we would use the Control A hotkey to select all of our table, and then we would insert that into our 3D map. I'm just going to double check to make sure that there's no missing values. Yeah, so it's been recoded as 0. If there is, that's great. Now we jump back into our 3D map. So right now, all that we have to tell Excel where to map this stuff is the city. It's recognizing the city, but it's not recognizing the dissemination area unique identifier yet, because we haven't given it a shapefile and we haven't told it what the primary key to code to within that shapefile is. So it's just showing up as a dot in Ottawa. So this is where we would want to import our custom regions. So because you're not likely to have a custom region or a shapefile that's correctly formatted just readily available, this would be time to use what's in the Dropbox folder. Because that's already, it's been formatted correctly. It's using the World Geodetic System 1984 coordinates, and this is the shapefile that you would select. So here you would want to pick your region name. So essentially you're picking the primary key within your shapefile. So the shapefile that we download from Statistics Canada has lots of different variables and fields within it. And basically what we're going to map to is DAUID here, dissemination area unique identifier. So for my Ottawa data set, they're showing as having 1,456 different areas of geography. So 1,400 dissemination areas within the data set that I've given it. So now that you've done that, you now will go to your location and you will instruct Excel to look for the custom regions. Okay, so we're going to have to basically, we're going to have to delete this field, use DAUID as the location, but it was previously mapping to city. We wanted to look at dissemination areas, so we're going to tell it where to look for that ID number, and then we're going to refer it to the custom region shapefile that we just uploaded. And obviously, now it's giving you point data so each one of these represents a dissemination area, but obviously we want to look at it more usefully as a region. So now you can see that Excel has correctly accepted the dissemination area shapefile. It's mapping the boundaries correctly, and it's now finding that it's finding the data that refers to those shapes from our Excel data set. So at this point, we can now go through and what we'll want to do is add the selected data to 3D maps. We've already done that. So here we want to map CAN risk scores. So now you can see each dissemination area mapped according to risk. And because it's not picking a great color, it's kind of hard to see which areas are higher risk or lower risk. So that's when we're going to go into our layer options, maybe pick a better color, maybe a dark red. And we're just going to decrease the scale. And the other thing we can do is to start to filter our values so that we're only showing areas that could be at higher risk. So within this model, a score of 13 or higher is going to suggest that an area, any given area, is at higher risk for diabetes based on the demographic data for that shapefile. So we're going to set our filter for the can-risk variable. We're going to allow ourselves some margin of error. So maybe if we can map all the values that are 10 and above, that'll give us a good sense, and it'll start to really narrow down the scale to really bring forward the areas that are at higher risk. Those will be much darker than the areas that would be closer to a 10 or a 9. So then suddenly you've managed to create a map that tells you something about diabetes risk in Ottawa and where you might want to focus your efforts, which is really useful. Other things that you could do to make this more of a usable end product is to start to add different fields here. So you could going back to your data set, start to introduce different fields here. Bring in some of those census fields around, just the population for that area. You can bring out how many folks are age 65 and up. You could bring the prevalence for low income, for example, and those would all be useful data points to map to display onto your data map here. And you could add those as different layers. So we could just, we want to keep this one as just can risk score. And we can create additional layers that would maybe tell us about the dispersion of different linguistic minorities, and that map would serve a different purpose. Another thing you could do is you could add a layer that has some location features. So, for example, if you wanted to map on top of this all of your community health center locations or all of your screening locations, then you could create a new tab here and create a new tab, and you can have address, name, and start to say, I want to map Centertown Community Health Center. We're at 420 Cooper Street, Ottawa, Ontario, and start to have some other locations. You can, as long as you format that as a table, then you can start to add that into your data model. So your table is now selectable as a second layer here. You can see address, name from the table that I just created. I'm going to specify that it's a full address so that I can find the locations. It's mapped it with 100% confidence. So it knows where that point is. And bing, that's actually where I am right now. So 420 Cooper Street. So you've now mapped your location on top of this map that tells you something about diabetes risk. So I know that was really fast. There's a lot of different parts to that demonstration. So at this point, I'll just open it up to questions. It gives you a good sense of what's possible within Excel using custom regions. And so, yeah, I'll take your questions.
Okay, so Alexandra is asking if for your custom geographies, you have to download the shapefile that is on Dropbox.
Yeah, so for basically the issue is that Statistics Canada provides shapefiles, but it doesn't provide them in the right format. So you kind of need an intermediary, someone who has ArcGIS on their laptop, and this is ideally suited for someone who works with your data consortium, to actually go through it and convert those shapefiles from a Lambert conic coordinate system to a WGS 1984 coordinate system. In my presentation here, I actually have a slide that explains a little bit of the difference.
Now, Alex, for somebody who is fairly familiar with GIS, that conversion, is that a fairly simple process?
It's very simple. So if you have ArcGIS, it's in your data management toolbox, and the tool is actually called Project rather. And you'd bring in your shapefile that's in this configuration here, and then you would specify that you want to save it as a new coordinate system, which is this one here, WGS 1984, which is what most web-based GIS kind of search engines use. So Google Map, Bing Search, etc. The coordinates are all in WGS 1984 Web Mercator. So that's why Excel Maps is a bit finicky about the format of your shapefile. But so long as you reproject it in the correct coordinates and then save that shapefile in the correct format, then you can bring it into Excel, no problem.
So this is certainly
again, that's something that
you can ask within your consortium, within your local consortium, anybody you know who does have a bit more GIS capability, particularly if you have a city or a region that you're working with, a simple request would be able to get those produced for you fairly quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And actually what our STEFCA at the Ottawa Community Data Program has actually done is downloaded the shapefiles for all Statistics Canada geographies into an Excel map, so that really you can just download the map and you're good to go. You don't have to fiddle with the shapefiles at all, which is really convenient for, again, these nonprofit organizations that just want to be able to look at the data.
Well, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We also had questions about how annotations work on the map, and are there any limitations?
Yeah, so annotation, it's I'd say it's still a pretty basic feature. So you basically have two ways of annotating your map, and one is of looking at the data for any particular shapefile. And the one way is to really mouse over it, and you can see some variables here, and you can add to that, add to what is visible there. So for example, I could add city in. Now it tells me, that we're in the city of Ottawa. Not very helpful, but just to say you can add in more information there. So if you wanted to identify what's the top linguistic minority within that area, then you could, map that, have that in your data set, and then map that too, so that when you mouse over, you can visibly see it. But the challenge is that, to annotate every single shapefile is going to create quite a crowded map. So you can annotate some of the pieces that are interesting to see, but I would say that it's not as convenient as ArcGIS, where you could really just map the value, the number, right onto the shapefile, just so that it's easy to see. Here, what's helping you to identify the areas of interest is the color code. And if there's an area that you want to really bring attention to, that's when you would probably annotate and say, high-risk area. And then, give a bit more information about the CAN risk score and say, this is an area of high risk. to people who are looking at your map. So some limitations, but still quite powerful.
Alex, we have a question about, so from the County of Simcoe, would DAs, CSDs, CTs all be considered custom geographies and therefore not available using Excel 2013?
That's correct. So you can't import any custom regions within 2013. That's the issue. So,
okay, right. So they're
you're going to be
standard
limited
for census, but they're not standard according to Excel.
That's correct. Yeah, exactly. So, sorry, I should disambiguate there just to say that when I'm talking about standard, I should really talk about maybe simple geographies rather than custom geographies. So let's use that language. Simple geographies are things that you can put into Google Map and find, and then custom regions are things that you really have to bring in the shapefiles, and that includes all the standard geographies from Census, from Statistics Canada.
And Mike is pointing out that if you do have any shapefiles that you've converted that you want to share, we can certainly put them into our community data catalog, and then they would be there and ready to download for any of your consortium members or anybody in the whole program.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And what we've actually done in Ottawa is, I'm just going to go to it here. This is what Stefka's provided. So it's a job box folder with custom geographies and all custom geos for the Ottawa area. So you can open that up. And so here, you can see we have awards, we have community health and resource centers, Ontario early years centers, Ottawa neighborhood study neighborhoods. So those are all areas with custom geographies, custom boundaries, and the shapefiles have already been imported directly into this Excel file, so that you can really just, if you're a data user and you only care about the wards, so you're planning to do some canvassing for the next municipal election, you don't really care about all this stuff here, you can just delete all of these tabs and just keep the wards and add your data to the record. So that's a really nice, convenient way to just make it kind of ready-made for your end users.
Absolutely. We also have another question from Jessica about, do you have other product examples that you used the 3D mapping function for?
Sorry, other project examples? Is that what was that?
So what else have you done to use the 3D mapping?
Yeah, so that basically the demonstration that I just gave you around the CanRisk score, that's really the kernel of an idea that has since become a full-fledged data tool for our diabetes screening program. In my personal life, I am currently helping a friend out with a municipal campaign. So, making use of dissemination areas to look at different minority groups within a ward, to be able to tailor, so that you can have volunteers who speak the languages of the folks that you're trying to reach. So you can use your census data that way. But really, the sky is the limit. You can use this for really anything that you think of.
All right, a few more questions about the mapping itself. Tracy Lewis is asking about using a legend for the color and rather than annotation. Is that possible?
So there is a legend. So sorry, the question is to use a legend for...
So that's the legend there. So I guess, is the question, Tracy, like, do you want to try to break that out and more like what an ArcGIS legend would look like? Oh, just providing more details so that you have the 17.6. So that's showing that that's the higher risk score and 10 being lower. Alex, is there a way to sort of add more detail to the legend itself?
the legend itself, it's pretty limited, as you can see. So you can take the title off, on, and then it's going to populate based on what is showing, what is being displayed. So as you maybe categorize your data a little bit more, then the legend, there might be some additional information that gets added in, but it's going to be it's not highly customizable. So it's really looking at what data you're displaying, and then that's feeding the legend, and there's not much customizability.
Okay, so you'd have to maybe add some more detail yourself.
Yeah, so perhaps you would just capture the screen and then bring that into a Word document or a presentation, or even the Excel document itself as an image, and then maybe add some text over top of that to give you more additional information.
Okay. Okay, let me just see that. Okay, there's also a question about creating quintiles in Power Map without doing them in the Excel table first. Is that possible to do just within the
Yeah, that's a good question. If you go into filter, yeah, I'm not seeing anything readily available to do that kind of work. So you may have to specify it before it gets in.
I guess the nice thing about this is that everybody's pretty comfortable using Excel, and so you'd be able to do them with Excel.
Yeah, this is really for to be able to share. So rather than, I think in the past, as a knowledge broker or someone who works at at StatsCan or a city or in public health who has that ArcGIS software and is able to create maps, you might be tempted to create maps for nonprofits that you're collaborating with, things that might be decision-making tools for them, but they would be flat maps, and so there's not much that they would have to basically, if the data wasn't there that they needed, there's not much else that they couldn't really go in and dig and look through the data that you've provided them. So this is kind of a nice middle of the way. You're not opening up ArcGIS and having the chance to really do intense analytics, but you have enough here that someone who knows something about data and what they're looking for can kind of select from the fields of the data that you've included in the columns and kind of select what they want to look at and then just kind of go for it.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say we're about 2:15 right now, so we are going to continue with questions for another 15 minutes or so. Just before we lose people during question period, I just want to put up one more poll question for you. Alex was just interested to know if this webinar did what we tried to do and made you more comfortable with a GIS. So are you more likely now to use GIS software as a result of this webinar? So either using Excel or any other type of GIS. And a follow-up comment on doing the quintiles was just North Bay was saying that they could actually just create 5 different layers, each showing 1/5 of the data. And so you could just manipulate Excel itself. And I guess the thing is that you're doing the analysis within Excel and using the mapping function to visualize it, as opposed to an ArcGIS, which is more capable of doing some powerful analytics within the mapping tool itself.
Yeah, exactly. So here's a final look at the tool that I ended up developing for our regional diabetes program. I'm going to open up the map here as you're finishing up that.
Yeah, and I'll just finish that poll. So great. Alex, it's overwhelmingly people are more interested in doing more with GIS. So that's good. You haven't scared too many people off.
Great. And so here you see on the left-hand side what I've done is I've created a few layers. So one is the diabetes risk itself. Then we have our potential screening locations, the locations of our partners, where we often offer screenings. And then beyond that, I've created a separate map within the same document that is looking at linguistic minorities. So it's telling you how many people, it's giving you a count, how many people within each dissemination area speak a non-official language of your choosing. So you could go through, if you're interested in looking at, you're looking at offering an event in Chinatown, in Ottawa, but you don't really know you know that it's an East Asian population, but you're not quite sure what languages are spoken. That's when you might want to go through here and specify, okay, let's look at Cantonese, let's look at Mandarin, let's look at Vietnamese, and perhaps Thai. And so now what's happening is that the category with the highest count is going to show up based on this legend here. So if I close that out for a second, now at a glance, you can see which, where those groups are distributed within Ottawa. Using, again, this is just census data. It's publicly available. You just download it from the website, and you can really get into this, just seeing, okay, well, within our Chinatown, which is this region over here, it's actually primarily Cantonese and Vietnamese, so there's not much Mandarin-speaking folks concentrated in that area. So we're going to focus on getting translators that would speak those two languages as opposed to Mandarin.
That's very neat. Well, I think Alex has covered most of what we're going to cover today. We do have 10 more minutes, and so we're going to stay here and answer any more questions people have. But I just want to take a second and say thank you very much to Alex. I really appreciate this. It's nice having these webinars that are so detail-oriented and work-focused. I hope everyone thinks that they can actually just go now this afternoon and actually copy somewhat of what Alex has showed you with your own data, and you have an idea of actually how you're going to use this. This is also a great example of what you can do when you work within a local data consortium, because you can pull on expertise of different groups, and nonprofits like the social planning councils and the health centers can really draw on some of the GIS expertise of the people around their table. So thank you very much, Alex. We really appreciate it, and that was a fantastic demonstration.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us and asking questions. As always, your questions are obviously on the minds of many people, and so it's very helpful that you participate and put those on. So thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you again on another webinar. And in the meantime, we will stick around and spend 10 more minutes talking about Excel.
All right, so are we still taking questions, or?
See if there's any more questions. We're getting a lot of thank yous, a lot of appreciative people participating.
Oh, okay, great.
See if there's any more.
Helpful.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments coming through, all saying thank you very much.
Oh, great, great.
So we have a question whether Excel recognizes latitude and longitude.
Yes, it does. If you have those coordinates, you can plug them right in as two columns, and then you would go to this and specify each column as either latitude and longitude, and oftentimes it'll find it right away. So if you called your column, if your header name is lat and the other header name is lon, it'll typically just map right to those values, and it'll identify that those are lat and lon values.
That's cool. That'd be really useful for adding addresses in for,
Absolutely.
centers or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you were making a geocaching map to play with your friends in order to practice using 3D Excel maps.
There you go.
We have a question about if you can briefly review the process for connecting shape files and data. Is it in one file? Is it created in one?
Yeah, sure. So, so maybe we'll just pick up from that slide. So, over here, we've selected our data. We are inserting it into our map. And so we're going to want to, now that we have the data, we're going to want to import that shapefile. And you can see this is actually a folder where you'd have the collection of shapefiles. So shapefile is not just one file, it's all these together. You would select your shapefile, open that up, and now you're basically going to find the column within that shapefile. So the shapefile itself has a bit of a database. There's a data, almost like an Excel spreadsheet attached to it with all of these columns. And the one that corresponds to our dissemination area ID numbers is itself labeled DAUID within the shapefile. So we're going to say that that is what we want to be using as the primary key to connect the shapefile to the data set. We click Import. And it's already kind of done it for us because it was previously. What if we refresh here? Yeah, okay. So here's where you would specify. You would, this would be off. You would add a field. Your table has a DAUID number. That's your primary key. So you use that as your location, and you're going to map it to the custom region shapefile. Okay? And that is when you're going to see the magic happen. So it may show up as this initially, so it just points for each of your dissemination areas. But as you change the visualization to regions, then you're going to get the boundaries showing up as they should. Any other questions?
That seems to be it for now, Alex, which is just about perfect time for us to be finishing up. So that's great. Just gives everybody a...
Yeah, that's great. I was really worried about going over.
Yeah, no, it actually went pretty quickly. So that was good. And you didn't rush through it. So that was also good. Because if you go too fast, then you lose everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's great. So I've just put my email address up on the chat box. Please get in touch with me if you are missing any of those resources, and I can send them directly to you, and hopefully we'll get those working out. Alex, do you want to just type your email address in, and then anybody can follow up with you directly if they have any further questions about the actual mapping functions?
Yeah, sure. So doing that now, Mayer at centertownchc.org is how you can reach me.
Yeah, so in the meantime, feel free to contact all of us. If you do manage to do something with this and you want to share it back with Alex, I'm sure he'd appreciate that, as well as the rest of the network of community data program members, so you can always let us know what you've managed to do with it. I think this is a really great tool because for a lot of our users working in the nonprofit area, this is actually very accessible as far as a tool goes. Yes, Martin, we will have this webinar recorded, and so you'll be able to follow through, but also the document that's on the Dropbox that Alex has prepared actually has live videos in it. And so if you just follow through the presentation, you can click on the little bits of recording, and he actually does a little video step by step. And so that's probably actually a better way for you to look at it. And he's going to bring it up right now. But this is within the PDF, within the PowerPoint presentation. So he'll show you an example. And so you can see
yeah, so it's quite a big PowerPoint for that reason, but it does have a lot of helpful videos so that you can just download this presentation and use it as a learning tool.
And so that's probably the most often, but absolutely this recording and sometimes just doing it with what we're familiar with is nice when you've already seen it through this way. So it will definitely be available up on our website. And Mike has put the link there, so it'll be there later in a couple of days. Give us a couple of days to get it all sorted out. All right, and that's it for today. So thank you everybody for participating, and thank you again to Alex. We really appreciate this time, and well done. This is a wonderful presentation and very accessible and shareable, which is very nice.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining.